Bonjour à toutes et à tous, bienvenue dans Parlez-vous cinéma, l'émission du Festival international du film d'Amiens. Aujourd'hui, nous recevons Nick Deocampo, réalisateur et figure du cinéma queer philippin. Vous êtes l'invité mis à l'honneur au FIFAM cette année à travers une semi-rétrospective composée de 7 de vos films. Vous serez accompagné de Elena qui fera la traduction pour nous. Elena, Nick, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Dans ton premier film, Nick, qui s'appelle Oliver, qui est sorti en 1983, on suit un jeune homme qui performe dans les bars gays de Manille. Il fait ça pour subvenir aux besoins de sa famille pauvre, en pleine dictature de Marcos, aux Philippines. Qu'est-ce que tu voulais montrer de ton pays à ce moment-là?
So in your first film, Oliver, that you released in 1983, we follow a young man who performs in gay bars in Manila, and he does this to provide for his poor family at a time when the Philippines were under the Ferdinand Marcos dictatorship. And what did you want to show about your country at that moment?
There was a lot of suppression of truth because it was still the time of the military dictatorship. So you cannot trust the media. And there was a lot of denial about poverty and about sexual repression. And so I grew up as a homosexual, during 20 years of the Marcos dictatorship. And I was in film after I studied in Paris in an atelier by Jean Rouge. So I came home in 1982, and then based on my studies here, wherein you use cinema for truth, I tried to do that in the Philippines. So I tried to show what was exactly the reality that we were living. There was poverty, and I had to show that in my film, because many of the commercial films in the Philippines, they are about entertainment and commercialism and sex and violence, but addressing poverty was not really the practice. And the second thing is, as a homosexual, I did not believe in the images of gays and lesbians that I see on the screen. And therefore, I took that as an opportunity, because I was working in Super 8, independent, alternative cinema. It's not commercial. And therefore, I thought I could be able to, reveal the truth of the sex and the poverty and the prostitution that happened under the facade of the military dictatorship.
Donc, à cette époque, aux Philippines, il y avait beaucoup de suppression de la vérité par le régime autoritaire de Marcos, et il y avait beaucoup de négation de la pauvreté et aussi de la répression sexuelle sur l'expression de l'identité sexuelle. Donc, Nick Deocampo est parti étudier à Paris, dans l'atelier de Jean Rouch. Il est rentré en 1982 aux Philippines, et c'est donc là-bas qu'il a voulu amener le cinéma vérité. Car à l'époque, il constatait beaucoup de films commerciaux qui étaient loin de la vérité sociétale de l'époque. Et en plus, en tant que personne queer, ne croyait pas du tout aux images de personnages LGBT qu'il pouvait voir à l'écran à ce moment-là. Et donc, voilà, il pensait pouvoir révéler la vérité sous la façade de la dictature de Marcos.
Est-ce qu'à ce moment-là, dans les années 80, sous la dictature de Marcos, il y a d'autres cinéastes avec qui tu travailles?
So at that time, in the 1980s, under Marcos' dictatorship, were there other filmmakers you were working with?
That I was working with? Mainly for Oliver, I did it by myself. It's a single. I was the one holding the camera, I was holding the microphone, and I was holding the light and giving my direction. So it's that's what I trained in Association Varan, in the Atelier Varan, that you can do films on your own. So I was one among the early filmmakers in the Philippines that tried to engage myself in independent filmmaking. In other words, you can be a single filmmaker to do your film. I even edited my film and put sound and put the music. So it's a total filmmaking kind of practice. But I also I also organized workshops, because I was inspired by the atelier that I attended. So I went to the Philippines and conducted my own workshops. And I trained young people also in that kind of filmmaking. And it was very successful. A new generation emerged from that. So that is what I can talk about in terms of alternative cinema, because there was the movie industry, and movie industry, they have a big production with all the people working. We did not work with that.
Donc pendant Enlever, pour la réalisation d'Enlever en tout cas, Nick Deocampo était tout seul avec la caméra, il était tout seul au micro, à la lumière. C'était un des premiers cinéastes indépendants aussi aux Philippines. Et donc il a même fait le montage son et le montage image lui-même. Il a fait aussi donc beaucoup de workshops dans l'idée de former une nouvelle génération de cinéastes. Et donc voilà, à cette époque-là, il ne souhaitait pas du tout travailler avec des grosses productions.
Justement, dans une interview pour Trois Couleurs, tu cites des cinéastes d'autres nationalités que philippines. Fellini, par exemple, Fassbinder, Pasolini, Andy Warhol, Paul Schrader. À l'époque, pourquoi le cinéma philippin ne t'intéressait pas?
So in an interview for Trois Couleurs, you cite filmmakers of other nationalities, the Fellini, Werner Fassbinder, Pasolini, Andy Warhol, Paul Schrader. At the time, were you not interested in the Philippine cinema or the commercial comedies in the cinema? What was your country offering in terms of cinema?
It was in the 80s. It was very divided because the popular cinema was very commercial. So it was about sex and violence and horror. All right, the genre movies. It was very popular. The homosexuals were being laughed at. They are caricatures. They're not serious. But because it was the time of dictatorship, there was a generation of filmmakers who took cinema seriously. This would be Lino Brocka, Ismael Bernal, and that generation. But you could see that they were doing compromises, that they can only show reality so much because there was censorship by the military. There was the church that didn't want to show, reality, in a way that we would understand reality to be. So that was what Philippine cinema offered. When I came back, I would like to think that my contribution was to create an alternative space, a space outside of the commercial movie industry, where you make films seriously, where we could be, the models that we had, like Pasolini or Fassbinder, that they could make films like auteurs. And so I think I contributed to the division, to the fragmentation of cinema during that time.
Dans les années 80, c'était un paysage très divisé dans le cinéma philippin. Le cinéma populaire, il était très axé sur le sexe, sur la violence, sur l'horreur, des choses sensationnelles, et les personnages LGBT étaient souvent des caricatures. Mais comme voilà, c'était un moment qui était sous une dictature très stricte, ça a créé aussi une génération de cinéastes qui prenaient le cinéma très au sérieux, mais qui devaient faire face à de la censure assez virulente, à la fois de la censure militaire et de la censure de l'Église. Donc l'idée, c'était de pouvoir créer un espace alternatif quand même, basé sur tous les modèles de cinéastes cités auparavant.
Tout à l'heure, tu as cité ton passage à Paris, ton travail avec Jean Rouch notamment. Qu'est-ce que ça t'a apporté?
So during your time in Paris, you worked with Jean Rouch. What did that bring to you?
Actually, there were other instructors who taught us. So Jean Rouch came, I think, twice in our class, and he showed films, his African tribal films. And I didn't know Jean Rouch yet, I was young, I was just 21, and I came from theater. But he was so impressive. I mean, he was speaking in French, it had to be translated, but his movement, his energy inside the room, is something I cannot forget. I still have a memory of Jean Rouch, and it was at a cinematheque at Musée de l'Homme or something. There was an audiovisual room, and that was where he showed films and introduced us to ethnographic filmmaking. And so when I went to the Philippines, I made a research, and then later on when I studied in New York University for my master's in cinema, I had a class on documentary, and we had a course on ethnographic films, and we know that the name of Jean Rouch was very big, you know, and that I connected to my education in Paris, that he was one of the founders of the Atelier Varan. And so I thought I was in good company. I was trained well, because since then I made around 50 documentaries. So mainly the influence of Jean Rouch and of documentary film making was very strong in me. And I'm very, very grateful for that.
Donc pendant cette formation à l'atelier de Jean Rouch, il a eu plutôt d'autres intervenants, mais Jean Rouch est quand même venu 2 fois leur montrer leur film. Ça a été un moment très impressionnant, il parlait en français, il fallait qu'il soit traduit, etc. Et donc grâce à cette formation, Nick Deocampo a continué ses recherches à la fois aux Philippines et pendant ses études à New York. Et c'est là aussi qu'il a commencé vraiment à comprendre le poids, l'influence du travail de Jean Rouch sur le cinéma dans son ensemble. Et depuis, voilà, il a été très inspiré par cette expérience et a fait 50 documentaires. Donc voilà, c'est resté très marquant pour lui.
Dans cette rétrospective sur ton travail au FIFAM cette année, il y a un film qui s'appelle Private Wars, dans lequel tu pars à la recherche de ton père, disparu il y a 10 ans, à l'époque du film, il y a 10 ans donc, qui est très violent envers toi et ta mère. Est-ce que tu voulais faire une œuvre contre le patriarcat à l'époque?
So in this program dedicated to you in the festival, there's the film Private Wars, in which you go searching for your father, who had disappeared 10 years earlier. And your father is a very violent character in that film. It's clearly a work against patriarchy.
Est-ce que tu voulais faire une œuvre contre le patriarcat?
Oui, so did you want to make a work that is explicitly against patriarchy?
I think the program that I have here in Amiens is very interesting because the selection sort of foregrounded the idea of patriarchy, which I think as a homosexual is a force that I was working against with, and it shows in my films. I think several of my films address the issue of patriarchy. And in Private Wars, I was very personal about it because patriarchy happens in so many levels. It starts with the family. You know, so I started with my family that, you know, I had an experience of it wherein the father is very dominant and would like to control you. But I'm a homosexual, so he doesn't seem to know what to do because that's what patriarchy is. They just know what is male, what is straight, what is, you know, dominant. And so I was taking a different point of view. I was closer to my mother. I was working with matriarchy. And, you know, I wanted more humanity to happen. And aside from that, there's also the government. It was a dictatorship, again, another form of patriarchy. And then the church, which is led by, you know, a father figure. Your God is male. So again, that's another level of patriarchy because it imposes control over your soul even, the way you conceive who you are as a person. And then it marginalizes you in so many ways. And there is the society that has been brought up in very patriarchal military, and the economy is just favoring men who are productive. So if you're homosexual, you're not part of the business enterprise. It's then you begin to see, and I think that's what Private Wars is all about. It's a perspective from a personal point of view that begins to see my own world, that I am shaped, and even my father. So I understand him. In the end, I understand him. The film makes an appeal to understand exactly that he is also a victim of a very patriarchal world.
Donc la programmation à Amiens, elle est assez intéressante de ce côté-là, puisque la sélection, elle met vraiment en jeu, elle met en dialogue la notion de patriarchie dans la façon dont les courts-métrages sont agencés. Et en tant qu'homosexuel, c'est un sujet qui a été très sensible, qui a été central dans la vie et dans le travail de Nick Deocampo. La patriarchie, ça commence surtout avec la famille, où on a une construction, un modèle masculin, un modèle dominant. Et il voulait, lui, de son côté, explorer plus la matriarchie, le côté plus humain. Et aussi, dans un temps de dictature, c'est un système patriarcal également qui se met en place, Et en plus de tout ça, bien sûr, la présence très forte de l'Église, où là, on a un dieu, une figure masculine qui met en jeu le contrôle de l'âme, qui oppresse les personnes marginalisées, la communauté LGBT, etc. L'économie aussi va favoriser les hommes hétérosexuels à ce moment-là. Donc Private Wars, c'est une perspective, un point de vue personnel de son monde, de sa façon dont lui a vécu les effets du système patriarcal, mais finit par se rendre compte que son père était tout de même une victime de ce système.
Justement, dans ce film, tu évoques la guerre et tu évoques deux combats. Donc la guerre réellement avec des images d'archives de la Seconde Guerre mondiale, mais aussi le combat être gay et l'affirmer. Pourquoi ce rapprochement ? Pourquoi utiliser les termes de guerre et de combat pour parler de l'homosexualité ?
So in Private Wars, you evoke war, you evoke battles, you have archive material, but you speak of another kind of struggle, that of being gay and asserting the fact that you're gay. Why did you make this connection, and why use the terms war and battle to speak about sexuality?
I think a word can have so many meanings. A word can not just be singular in terms of what it evokes, but it can, of course, provide other meanings. And at the time when I made my film, I guess, I was convinced that I was going through a state of an emotional war. I had to see a psychiatrist, I had to fight, and in a war you fight, I even had to fight my own father, fight the system. And so I made that connection. But interestingly, the motivation to make the film was I was one of the 2 Asians who were commissioned to make a documentary during the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. So one was Indonesian and one was Filipino. That was me. Our films, documentaries that would reflect on World War II were produced by Japan's or Asia's biggest TV station, NHK, Tokyo. And so the theme was about war. So I could have just talked about my father, but that's not enough. I wanted an understanding of what happened after the war, which caused families to divide and fragment and become destroyed. That was really due to war. I mean, my father had a PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and who became the victim? So even after the war, my father was in a state of war in terms of his imagination. He looked at us as his enemies, because he was drunk, he was alcoholic. That was the effect of war. So war seeps very deeply into the very fabric of society, and that means, it affects society, and what better way to reveal what is happening in society, but also to reflect in my own personal history.
Donc un mot peut avoir tellement de sens différents. Pour lui, en tout cas, il trouve beaucoup de richesse dans le fait de pouvoir interpréter différemment ces termes. Au moment où il a réalisé Oliver, il était en guerre émotionnelle assez forte. Il a vu un psychologue, il devait se battre contre son père et en même temps contre un système oppressif. Et à ce moment-là, il a été un des 2 seuls réalisateurs asiatiques qui ont une commande de films commémoratifs de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. Donc, le thème était la guerre. Il aurait pu parler seulement de son père, mais lui voulait s'intéresser aussi à l'après-guerre. Et son père était encore en état de guerre. Il avait un syndrome de stress post-traumatique. Et il voyait sa propre famille comme des ennemis. Il était aussi malheureusement pris d'alcoolisme, donc il avait des comportements très violents avec eux. Et donc la guerre, à ce moment-là, s'est immiscée très profondément dans la société. Et c'est ça qu'il a voulu laisser transparaître.
Est-ce que tu considères que le cinéma est un acte militant?
You consider that cinema as a form of activism?
Oh, definitely. I mean, anything personal can also be a form of activism. Activism, if seen in relation to what, all right? And what is there in cinema, for example, if you have a cinema that is entertainment and escapism and it doesn't want to address reality, then, you know, the activism that happens is to confront exactly the lack of engagement, the apathy. So my film becomes very different from the dominant cinema. And where can you find that? You find that in the bigger social struggle that is going on in the society, because there were movements that went against the dictatorship. There were movements that wanted to challenge the church in terms of its dominance, in terms of determining sexuality. So I identified myself with that. So its politics is against the majority rule, the dominant population. So that for me is a definition of activism. When you actively and critically participate in the social issues of your own time, and you take an oppositional view, which is not popular at all, but you know it's for the good of the greater humanity and of society.
Donc bien sûr que le film, ça peut être une forme d'activisme. Et même si le cinéma fuit la réalité, ça peut être aussi une forme d'activisme dans la façon dont c'est présenté, dans la fuite, voilà, dans une forme d'apathie, dans la fuite de la vérité. Ces films, donc, lui, étaient très différents du cinéma dominant. Et à ce moment-là, il y avait aussi des mouvements qui remettaient en question donc, la dictature, l'Église. Il s'est beaucoup identifié à ça. Et pour lui, la définition de l'activisme, en général, c'est la participation active dans les questions sociétales de son temps pour pouvoir œuvrer pour le bien de la société et de l'humanité dans son ensemble.
C'est une des premières rétrospectives sur ton travail en France. Qu'est-ce que tu ressens?
So this is one of the first programs about your films in France. What does that make you feel?
Oh no, I've been screened at the Cinémathèque Française. I have been screened in some other occasions, but the biggest that I had was the programming by Nicole Brunez in Cinémathèque Française. She showed, I think, 8 of my films in 2 days, if I'm not mistaken. So that was a kind of a retrospective that was given to me. Of course, I feel honored because when she did that, it was exactly the 40th anniversary when I finished my school in the atelier. And so I said, did she know about this, or this is just an accident that this happened? So, and from then on, I was picked up by Annabelle Aventurin and programmed it in a film program. She showed, I think, 2 or 3 of my films. And then this is a big program that we have here in 2 days. I know it was supposed to be 3 or 4 days, but I'm sorry, I'm in demand. I have to go to Marseille and to Arles and to Chéri in Paris. And so I have to cut my time here in Amiens. I'm sorry about that. But I'm very grateful because France knows how to recognize, filmmakers. I am just a small filmmaker with documentaries, queer films, I'm not funded in a big way. I don't have big stars in my films, but I think I have something very important to talk about, and that is truth and reality and the life that we live. And so I thank really Amiens because I had a very good audience here. The questions last night, the emotion inside the room was so powerful. You can feel it, I've been to so many festivals, Tokyo, Berlin, New York, London. All right, people are curious, but yesterday, because maybe 60% were young people, and so I felt that I was able to really connect with them.
Donc ses films ont déjà été montrés, notamment à la Cinémathèque, grâce à Nicole Brunel. Donc ça a été 8 de ces films qui ont été montrés en 2 jours à peu près. Donc, bien sûr, il se sent honoré à chaque fois qu'il a une sélection dans les festivals, que ce soit en France ou ailleurs. Et pour lui, ce moment-là, cette sélection à la Cinémathèque, ça marquait aussi le 40e anniversaire, la 40e année d'enseignement qu'il a mené à l'université à Manille. Et c'était aussi son année de retraite. Donc c'était un marqueur assez fort pour lui. Évidemment, il y a le travail qu'il a mené aussi avec Annabelle Aventurin, qui est avec nous au festival en ce moment, pour le film. Et donc, il reste ici à Amiens 2 jours. Il regrette de ne pas pouvoir rester plus longtemps, puisqu'il a d'autres projections qui sont organisées à Marseille, à Arles et au festival Chéri Chéri à Paris. Mais voilà, il reste très reconnaissant, car pour lui, la France, c'est honorer les cinéastes. Et il se considère comme un plus petit réalisateur, mais avec quelque chose de très important à dire. Il a trouvé aussi un très très bon public à Amiens. Il était vraiment très enjoué. Parce qu'il a senti beaucoup d'émotions et beaucoup de partage qui venaient des retours qu'il a eus.
Aujourd'hui, tu diriges le Center for New Cinema à Manille. C'est quoi le cinéma philippin aujourd'hui?
Today you're running the Center for New Cinema in Manila. What is cinema for you today?
Oh, what is cinema for me today? Maybe because of my own training, it's really social engagement. It is not just personal expression. That social engagement can be personally expressed. But I feel that if you make films only for yourself and not for your audience, or you do not know your audience, then I feel it's a very narrow, it's a very shallow cinema. So my films, if you look at them, society is very much, I use a big word, imbricated. It's very much overlaid. My film is always in dialogue with society. And so that's how I feel. Because cinema is more than art. It is really a social communication. So I'm now working in a theoretical way because I'm also a historian and a professor. I write books. I have written 20 books, all right? I look at the semiotic possibilities of cinema in terms of communication. And that is very important because there are issues in our society that need to be understood, and cinema is a tool for that understanding.
Donc le cinéma, pour lui maintenant, c'est un engagement social et pas juste une expression personnelle. Si on fait des films sans penser au public qu'on va avoir, ça peut donner un résultat très léger. On est quand même face à une société qui est très imbriquée, qui a énormément de strates. Et le cinéma, pour lui, plus que l'art, c'est un commentaire social. Une communication sociale, pardon. Il s'intéresse donc aux possibilités sémiotiques du cinéma et la façon d'utiliser le cinéma comme un outil.
Écoutez, merci Elena pour la traduction. Merci Deocampo. Merci. Je rappelle que tu es l'invité d'honneur cette année au FIFAM à travers une semi-rétrospective de 7 films. Vous pouvez retrouver toutes les émissions de Parlez-vous cinéma sur le YouTube du festival. À la prochaine.